It's estimated that 1 out of every 4 women who are in their childbearing years in the United States is on an antidepressant to treat their quote-unquote depression or anxiety. And millions more are also on the birth control pill. But could these drugs actually be doing more harm to your body than good? We're going to crack open that conversation in today's episode of Unscripted. Thank you so much for listening, guys. This is the second episode, and as always, we have something really wonderful lined up for you today. Today's episode is partially supported by Quero Shoes. This is such a great company, I have to tell you. I'm so proud to be aligned with them. Let me tell you a little bit about Quero Shoes. They're handmade shoes for men and women, crafted by Spanish artisans who use only the finest materials from Italy and France and Spain. Quero has made it simple for you to buy a classic upscale shoe that is literally custom designed by you. So how do you do this? You simply go to Quero, that's QUEROHMS.com. You pick out a style you love, and man, do they have some gorgeous styles to choose from. I was on their website, and it's really off the hook. It's awesome. And then build your shoes to fit your own taste and measurements. You can actually pick the laces you want, the heel size, even the exact color of the leather. This is an old way to make shoes, but a new way to buy them. If that's not enough, they even offer free shipping in the US and free returns. That's awesome. And when you sign up for their newsletter, you get an extra 15% off with your purchase. Again, go to QUEROHMS.com to learn more. That's QUEROHMS.com to learn more. Today, I have on the show Dr. Julie Holland. She is an author and a psychiatrist in Simply, and I'm just going to say it here, guys. She's a total badass in her field. Her work talks a lot about the things other doctors, I think, are too afraid to actually discuss. This woman is trying to lift the veil, and you'll see what I mean when you hear our interview. We're going to talk about why so many women are medicated in this country. We're going to talk about the birth control pill and what I call the double whammy, when women are on both the birth control pill and on an antidepressant or a psychiatric medication, and what this combination actually does to their moods and their bodies. Because here's just one of the things that I want to try to understand and answer by doing this podcast. If millions of women are on antidepressants in this country, and again, 80 million people, it's estimated, are on psychiatric medications in the United States, are we really all that sad and depressed and anxious? Like, are we really all that bad off? Or are we just being told to medicate ourselves instead of changing what needs to be changed in our environments or within ourselves in order to feel better, in order to live better, in order to actually live the beautiful and vital lives we know are possible? And just to give you guys a view into my world for a second and to show you how systemic a problem medicating, especially women, has become in this country. I was in my office actually yesterday in New York City seeing patients, and I was sitting there across from them knowing I had to write the show notes for this actual show. So that was kind of on my mind as people were coming in and talking to me throughout the day. And this is uncanny, and I'm not kidding you when I tell you this. Three of my patients, young women in their 20s, saw me yesterday to ask whether or not they should go on medication for their, quote, anxiety and depression. I've been seeing these women for a while, all 3 of them, and I wouldn't classify, after doing this work for over 10 years, any of these women as seriously clinically depressed or even highly anxious. They are all highly, highly functioning women. They're all doing amazing things at their jobs. They're all navigating their worlds, being young women in New York City. They're socializing with friends and they're dating. They're all exercising regularly. But all 3 women had gone in to see providers in the last month who gave them prescriptions. These were either psychiatrists or nurse practitioners who, in an initial appointment that didn't even last more than 30 minutes, and in fact, I think the industry standard is 15, walked out with either a prescription to Prozac, Lamictal, which is for bipolar and mood disorders, or a benzo like Xanax. I asked all 3 patients separately, sitting there in my office. This is not a new story for me, so I wasn't like sitting there shocked, but I always just shake my head going, I don't understand how this happened. I mean, I do in this society and in my field, but again, I really think it's such a human travesty. So I asked all 3 of these young women separately, did any of the prescribers warn you of the following? 1, that these drugs have side effects like weight gain and loss of sexual functioning. All 3 said no. That these drugs can be extremely hard to taper off of. All 3 said no. And that these drugs can be highly addictive, especially the benzos. All 3 said no. I look back on my career, and for all of those who listened to my pre-episode, you already know this, I recommended medication to many of my patients over the years. And I'm not saying there isn't a time and a place for some of these meds. But again, now millions and millions of women are on them. So something is up here. We need to investigate and interview those of us on the front line who have witnessed with our own eyes whether or not these drugs have really helped or hindered women. This isn't actually comfortable for me to expose, by the way, professionally. You can imagine I don't get like high fives from all the psychiatrists that I work with. But I'm more concerned for the welfare of others and my desire for the truth than anything else. And let's be honest here, we all have to admit the big elephant in the room, that there is an inherent conflict in my field at play all the time. People like me make lots of money off prescribing drugs. The average cost of seeing a psychiatrist out of network in New York City, at least from the colleagues I know who prescribe, is on average about $500 a session. So what's the benefit of getting people well when it actually will take money out of your pocket? This is very scary, and in training we don't talk about it. We don't really talk about it at conferences. It's just sort of this unspoken thing in the room, and it always made me really uncomfortable. And this goes for talk therapy too, like endless hours of talk therapy. This episode isn't to shame anyone on meds or the pill or providers who prescribe at all. I've actually been on the birth control pill myself, and I've tried Zoloft after one of my pregnancies. I've recommended meds and still do once in a while. This is simply to ask some questions and then figure out if we can all do this better. This whole mental health thing, for the sake of women, for the sake of the men that love us, for the sake of men who actually also feel as if they need psychiatric medication or maybe on psychiatric medication, for our families, and especially for the little ones that many of us have who depend on us every single day. So Dr. Julie Holland is a psychiatrist and psychopharmacologist with a private practice in New York City, which she established in 1996. She is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and Temple University Medical School. She is a fellow of the New York Academy of Medicine, where she is assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at NYU School of Medicine from 1996 to 2012. She is the editor of 2 nonprofit books which help to fund clinical research, Ecstasy, The Complete Guide, and The Pot Book, A Complete Guide to Cannabis. Dr. Holland is a medical monitor for a clinical study examining the efficacy of using cannabis in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans. And her new book is called Moody Bitches, The Truth About the Drugs You're Taking, the Sleep You're Missing, the Sex You're Not Having, and What's Really Making You Crazy, which was published by Penguin Press in March of 2015 and has been translated now into 11 languages. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Holland. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So as I was just telling you before, this book is, if I could have written a manifesto and I was a psychiatrist, I think I would have tried to write your book. I think it's brilliant and timely and is filled with gravitas and importance for our culture right now. The reason I feel that way is because, estimated 80 million Americans are on psychiatric medications at this point in our culture?
Yeah, I mean, it translates into about 1 out of 4 adult American women. And that's just antidepressants. When you add in anti-anxiety meds, sleeping pills, those numbers are higher. And when you look at certain metropolitan areas, those numbers are much higher.
And you say at the beginning of the book that Moody Bitches is a nonsense book for women and those who love them. And I love that, because it's not just a guide for women to help themselves. It's for family members who want to help women who either may be on medication or and want to get off of medication, because you provide lots of holistic methods in the book about how to treat our moods. And also for those of us who are just struggling with our moods and don't understand our bodies and how they work. And you say the problem isn't our emotionality, it's that we are being convinced to escape it and to medicate it away. And we do that as women most of the time to make others feel more comfortable. Is that not true?
No, it's definitely true. I mean, I think, first of all, there is sort of a bias in our culture right now against being emotional. You know, you're called hysterical or irrational. As soon as you're expressing emotion, people are sort of allowed to ignore what you're saying. And when you're called hysterical, it really takes your power away. So, I sort of look at this as like the suppression of yin energy. I mean, for hundreds or thousands of years, men have been taught not to be emotionally expressive, and they've had their sort of yin energy suppressed. But now women are getting that message too. So, and also the drug ads are very much aimed at women. And the bulk of the psychiatric market really is women. I mean, women, especially if you're looking at like depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder, but especially depression, that women are going to seek treatment more often than men. Women are going to be in treatment more often than men. So that's really where the money is in terms of the market. And so the marketing has really been aimed at women and slowly sort of chipping away at any sense that it's okay to be sad. You know, there's this sort of artificial happiness that's being forced on us in TV shows and movies and drug ads that's unrealistic and somewhat unattainable. You know, in the same way that like a very thin woman in an ad for a lot of women, that's not an attainable body structure. It's the same sort of thing with mood. You know, there's a marketing of an unattainable mood.
And you know what, you make the point is that when women, the best qualities or some of the greatest qualities that women bring to the table just by intrinsically being women is that we're dynamic, that we're intuitive, and we're empathetic, and we can communicate. We can understand the delicacies of communication. And we need to do this biologically in order to take care of our clan. And when we medicate those things away, and we actually become more like quote unquote men who are seen to not be those who don't bring those qualities to the table, who bring a sense of what you say stability. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. I mean, you know, a woman who isn't on the pill, who is sort of free range and cycling, she's going to have times in her cycle where she feels more confident, more serene, and other times in her cycle where she feels more easily irritated and maybe sort of more critical. And, you know, it's nice to have all these different states to choose from. You know, it's nice to bring more sort of to the table than just it's all good, it's all fine. And when you get over-medicated with antidepressants, or when you take birth control pills and antidepressants together, which sort of have like almost a synergistic effect, where you've got very artificially high, artificially stable levels of estrogen, serotonin. So you're going to be more accommodating, but it's harder to cry, it's harder to climax, it's harder to connect with people. You know, I have my patients like it because they don't cry at the office, but also I think there's a problem because they're not crying at the office. You know, there's a lot of bad behavior that goes on between people, and a lot of times people need a real visual cue that they're misbehaving and that it's negatively affecting other people. So part of the problem with all these women medicating themselves is that it ends up enabling bad behavior in the people around them. You know, if you're medicated to the point where you think everything is fine and you don't need to fix anything, then you don't fix anything. Sometimes the environment really needs to change in order for somebody to get better. And just, you know, accommodating yourself to that environment, either by taking hormones or taking antidepressants, isn't always what's best for you.
Right.
I mean, I guess obviously we both have to cop to the fact that there are people who've got severe depressions, who've got bipolar disorder, who've got schizophrenia, who really need meds. And I'm not talking about those people. I mean, I worked at Bellevue in the psych ER for many years. I saw extreme versions of mental illness. I get that a lot of people need meds. But what's happening more and more is that people who don't need meds are being put on meds. Or really, they just need medicine like 3 or 4 days out of the month, which you absolutely can do with SSRIs.
Right.
And part of the problem, you go to the doctor, and as soon as you mention anything about stress or not sleeping well or, any kind of malaise, they're very quick to recommend that you take an antidepressant. And sometimes people are relieved to know there's something they can take to feel better. But part of the conversation that almost never happens is, how long are you going to stay on this medicine?
Right.
When are you going to come off of it? What is it going to feel like when you try to come off of it? Because what happens, two things happen. When people are put on meds and they feel better, they convince themselves like, oh, I had a chemical imbalance and I guess I needed that medicine, without realizing that nearly anybody who goes on these medicines is going to feel better. And whether that's true, for stimulants, people have this idea that if they do well with stimulants, it means they have ADHD. Not true. Anybody who takes a stimulant, for the most part, is going to have better focus and be a little bit more organized. Their brain's going to be a little bit more sticky. Anybody who goes on antidepressants is going to be a little happier, a little more relaxed. But the issue is that when you try to come off the meds,
my God,
it's very uncomfortable. And then people assume when they're trying to come off of it, they feel terrible. They make this assumption like, oh, I guess I really do have this imbalance. I guess I really do need these medicines. So people end up on these medicines for years and decades, and they really weren't studied to be taken for years or decades.
Right. I do. I mean, I see that in my clinical practice all the time, that people are never warned about the tapering side effects. Right. And, as bad as it is to come off the SSRIs, I find that coming off of Xanax and Klonopin and those types of drugs, it's actually incredibly painful as a therapist to witness the withdrawal.
Yeah, it's very challenging for the patient to go through that. And I would say the worst offenders actually are the SNRIs, these medicines like Effexor. I mean, Effexor is sort of far and away the hardest antidepressant to come off of. And then I would say Paxil is very difficult for people.
Yes.
And Cymbalta can be sort of tricky, but Effexor absolutely, takes the prize for being difficult to come off. But all the benzos, it's true, Klonopin, Xanax, they're all very difficult to come off. And part of the problem is you don't have anything to really put in place. At least if someone has trouble coming off of Effexor, I can give them an SSRI like Prozac or Lexapro to help them get off the Effexor, and then you can wean the SSRI. But with something like Xanax, maybe you can switch somebody to Klonopin, but it's just hard to come off of those meds.
So do you see most of the women that come into your office, are they already on medication and they're seeking you out to hopefully get off of medication because they feel something deep down is amiss and they don't want the side effects, right? Because it's really trading a bunch of symptoms that you come in with that you think you've kind of either labeled yourself or a doctor's labeled you as having depression or anxiety. You come into a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist's office and you say, I want to take medication because I don't want to feel what I'm feeling. But they're not warned that if you start taking the medications, you're replacing the symptoms that you're feeling of depression and anxiety with side effects from the medication that can be very disabling in themselves. So do you find many women coming into you already on these meds and you're trying to help them get off?
Well, certainly since Moody Bitches came out, I have more people coming to me who want help getting off meds. But the bulk of my practice is really people who have been recommended by their therapist, where the therapist thinks they need medicine, or somebody who's been on medicine for years. And more often than not, my patients want to continue their medicines. So I usually start with, what is going to work best for them and what they want, some combination of that. But once we're sort of steady and the medicine is working fairly well, then I start to address coming off the medicine, what you need to come off of it, what things need to be put in place to make coming off of the medicine easier. And it's, I know it's easier for most people to take a pill than it is to get to the gym or go outside and get sun and get exercise and follow an anti-inflammatory diet and try to do some meditating. And, it's good to have sex. It's good to connect with other people, eye contact, physical contact. There's a lot of ways that we're living now, especially, look, I work in the city and there's a lot of isolation in the city. As much as we're kind of rubbing up against strangers in the subway, a lot of our interactions are really, through Facebook or texting. or emails, and there's not always a lot of like community and eye contact and really bonding physically with each other. So I think that's one problem, is the culture of isolation, I think, makes people miserable. And then people aren't getting enough sleep. They're not getting any sunshine. And those are both sort of pro-inflammatory things. Like if you're trying to decrease inflammation to feel better, then you need more sleep, more sun, more exercise, more physical contact, and less stress. So I try to put a lot of things in place before we do a taper. But, no matter what, a taper is very challenging. And I definitely have higher success in the spring and summer tapering people off meds than I do in the fall and winter, like far and away. I mean, I will often encourage people to wait until the spring and summer to do a taper.
Yes, I would agree with that. That's, you bring up something so interesting. It's the hard work. Right? I think people, because we've just gotten so used to going into a doctor and saying, I don't feel well, and they give us a pill. I mean, I've had teenagers who have graduated from college, or young adults who've graduated from college, and they've moved home and they start feeling panicky because they're not quite sure what they're going to do with their lives, take themselves literally to a walk-in clinic, and just on a weekend, because they're feeling heart palpitations and they're having a little bit of a panic attack, and they walk out with Xanax or Klonopin. Right. And we obviously know that there's a massive problem with that in young adults, because they take them while they drink. They call them bars, and then it forces a blackout. And they're highly addictive. But, that's the thing. People don't want to do the hard work anymore of actually taking care of themselves and seeing what will happen if they do. And what's incredible about this conversation to me is that what we're attracted to in this life, and what we're attracted to about women, is women who are dynamic, women who are creative, women who are moving and have moods and have the ability to swing from high to low a little bit, because it brings something interesting to the table. And when we medicate that, all of that, and a lot of that goes away. One of the most
the cyclicity. The other thing I think it's really worth mentioning is this whole oral contraceptive issue.
Yes.
That you are going to lose the cyclicity if you're on the pill, even if you're not on antidepressants.
So when I originally called you, and I think this is important to tell listeners, I have so many women in my office who are on the birth control pill, and they are really having a difficult time choosing a mate, or they're with a partner and they're not sure if that partner is the right one, and they really struggle, especially when it starts to get closer and closer to them getting engaged, or they are engaged and they're about to walk down the aisle, and they're looking at me with panic in their eyes saying, I don't know if he's the one. And the first thing I recommend is that they get off the pill. And they look at me sort of shocked, like, what would the pill have to do with this? And I thought that was one of the most interesting parts of your book, is where you talk about how we choose our mates based on what's going on with our hormones. And when we take the pill, and sort of the double whammy of the birth control pill and then an SSRI or psychiatric medication, we stunt our ability to actually choose the correct mate, or the best suited mate for us.
Yeah, there's a couple things going on that I think are interesting here. I mean, look, if you're just on the pill, one of the ways that we mate with people, and that we choose mates, and especially that we choose to have babies with, is how somebody smells to us, and even like how they taste when you're kissing. But really, it's primarily a smell thing, and it's not about like body odor or antiperspirant or cologne. It's about pheromones, and the pill interferes with our ability to process pheromones, and so you end up with somebody. Pheromones are actually based on the same sort of matching system that's used for bone marrow transplants. It's the HLA. It has to do with our immune system. And you want to choose somebody who's got different immunity to different things than you, because if you're immune to 5 things and somebody else is immune to 5 things, then maybe your kids will be immune to 10 things. And that's what you want. You want more diverse immunity. So you want somebody who's not too similar to you, because that helps to make a stronger hybrid in your kid. So you choose somebody who isn't too much like you based on pheromones. And with the pill, you end up choosing somebody who is like you, who's not really a good match.
Can you explain why that is? Because what does the pill do? It takes away testosterone in the body, or how does it affect the pheromone?
Right. Well, the testosterone thing, I do want to talk about some other things that the pill does that makes mating a problem, and also some things that SSRIs do to interfere with mating. But in terms of this pheromone thing, it's not testosterone related. But yeah, the longer that you are on the pill, the lower your testosterone levels are. So you're going to be less horny, less sort of desirous, the longer you're on the pill.
And
but
does that
also,
compound?
even
And that compounds over time.
Well, I don't know that it goes up over time, but when you take hormones orally, your liver makes a protein called sex hormone binding globulin that ends up binding with the free testosterone in your bloodstream. And the longer you're on the pill, the more this binding protein builds up and the lower your testosterone levels are. So that's one issue. The other issue is the pill stops you from ovulating.
Right.
So the period, when you would typically be fertile and be more interested in sex and be more lubricated, that's gone from the pill. But now if you add SSRIs, the problem with SSRIs is if you are infatuated with somebody, if you become attached to somebody, it's a low serotonin, high dopamine state. So the high dopamine gives you drive. You're sort of out there. You're in the game. You're not on the bench. You're trying to make something happen. You're pursuing somebody. You've marked them as salient and important, and you're going after them. That's all dopamine. And then the low serotonin, you have this sort of angst for them. You're a little bit obsessed with them. You would treat obsessive compulsive disorder by increasing serotonin. So these low serotonin states, you're sort of more angsty, you're more obsessive. You obsess about somebody when you've fallen in love with them. It's all you can think about.
Right. I often tell my patients it's called the state of limerence. It's really, you say in the book, the surges in dopamine and oxytocin make someone manic, obsessive, and a little bit of a delusional junkie. I love that. Yeah.
Right. So, but the thing is, when you're on antidepressants, you don't get any of that. You get high serotonin, low dopamine, and you get none of that. You don't get obsessed. You don't get delusional. You just you're not driven to pursue them. And then if you're also on the pill, you're not horny, you're not ovulating, your body isn't telling you to go out and get a mate. And even if you find someone that you're visually attracted to, your pheromone system is kind of screwed up. You're not going to necessarily mate with the right person. So I have a lot of patients in my practice who I'm worried that the reason that they're in their late 30s, early 40s and can't find a mate and want to have a baby and they're miserable because they can't sort of couple is that their medicines are preventing them from coupling.
Yes.
I also have to sort of give some credit to living in New York City, where everybody thinks that they can always upgrade and you can always, swipe past the person you're with to meet somebody else. So I think that there is sort of a lack of commitment that happens in Manhattan also.
So really what you're saying, though, is either the birth control or the combination, again, of the birth control and an antidepressant prevents people from the experience of falling deeply in love.
Right.
We don't feel
becoming attracted, infatuated, attaching to somebody. Right.
And you also mentioned in the book that, and I say to patients, they look at me when I say you have to get off the birth control pill. I wouldn't want my daughter on the birth control pill because, again, it would stunt all of these emotional responses that we're built to have. So what's the other option that you would suggest for women who either are on the birth control and want to get off? I now suggest a IUD for many women. And I know you had said in the book a cervical cap, but they don't make those anymore. What do you suggest? I'm one of the reasons why I often want to talk about cervical casts on interviews and podcasts is because I want somebody to start a company and make these things again. Right. We should do that, Julie.
It's like a little piece of rubber that lasts forever. I don't know that there's a lot of money in it because you only need to buy one for, that can last you for years. So it's better for the environment. Because you can also use it as a diva cup. But it's a barrier form of contraception that doesn't require any hormones. And, whenever possible, I think I encourage my patients to use non-hormonal contraception. So, yeah, I definitely have patients who are on IUDs. I'm also a little bit more comfortable with people using rings and patches. The real problem is the oral hormones.
Yes.
As soon as you take it orally, you're going to get the sex hormone binding globulin protein sucking up the testosterone issue. So
why do you think they took that off the market? Why have they stopped making those?
I cannot for the life of me understand why you can't get a cervical cap. I mean, they don't make them anywhere. It's not even just America. Like you can't find them anywhere. And it's very hard to find diaphragms also. I mean, these were popular forms of barrier. The other problem with the pill is that you're really less likely to use a condom when you're on the pill, because you know you're not going to get pregnant, so you don't worry about it. But so you're more likely to end up with sexually transmitted infections
or diseases, right?
I feel like they stopped calling them STDs and started calling them STIs for some reason.
Yeah, I do. You know what? I have a lot of patients who come in and they do, because, and that's a little bit of a difference, I think, in sort of a generational thing. I mean, we grew up when AIDS, I did at least, I can't speak for you, Julie, but I grew up with health class. AIDS was just sort of coming out, and HIV infection. And we were really scared. You know, when I was dating, it was like you were absolutely afraid to have sex with someone without a condom. Where now in my private practice, as I'm newly single again for the last few years because I got divorced, but I am shocked at both in my personal life and in my professional life treating patients, especially millennials, how casually they'll have sex without using condoms. And I think, again, a lot of it is because they are on birth control pills, and and they'll you know, no one uses condoms. They don't like to use condoms, and they either come in, they say, with STDs or this whole thing called STIs. Which we try to always, you know, distinguish between. Do you, can you talk a little bit then about about this whole idea of the cougars, MILFs, and desperate housewives when there's a rise in testosterone? Because I think that there's a huge cultural shift going on, because so many women, I mean, I know just in my own life, for example, I was on the pill for many years, and then I got off the pill to end up having children. And I couldn't believe after having my first child, when I decided not to take the pill again, how absolutely horny I was. Like I was like, oh my God, what is this? What are these like surges that I'm having? And it finally hit me one day, even despite knowing what I do for a living. Oh my God, I think it's because I'm not on the pill and I'm actually feeling my cycles. And then when I had my last child, and again, didn't decide to go back on the pill after I knew my last child was born, there was this really intense increase around 37, 38, 39 of my sex drive. And it wasn't until I picked up your book that I realized, oh my gosh, I'm having a rise in testosterone, and that's causing it. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I feel pretty strongly that the cougar idea is sort of based in biological fact. It does make sense. They're all through your 40s, your cycles sort of get more intense because you're leading up to perimenopause. But what happens before perimenopause, I call it like the Mardi Gras before the Lent. It's kind of like your body's last gasp to see if you sure you don't want to have one more kid. We're gonna make you really want sex, so maybe you can have one more kid before you close up the shop. So like late 30s, early 40s, there's this sort of last gasp when your estrogen is starting to wane. You're getting toward perimenopause, but your testosterone is higher. So it's a time where you've got relatively higher testosterone levels than you ever did before, because you also have testosterone surges around adolescence. You know, when you're not when you first get your period, but a few years after, you start to have fairly high testosterone. But it's in the context of there being a ton of estrogen. But when it happens in your 40s, it's not in the context of a ton of estrogen. So you end up sort of with more testosterone than usual. And, you know, I definitely, when I was in my 40s, I had a lot of friends who were having affairs, who were getting divorced, or who were starting to get into like, swapping or playing.
Open marriages, polyamorousness.
Right. Because one of the things I write about in Moody Bitches about testosterone is that this is a hormone of novelty. Testosterone is not necessarily going to make you horny for the person that you're attached to and committed to and have kids with. It's going to make you horny for somebody who would be a good sperm donor and give you like a very healthy what's the word? Like a healthy offspring, you know? One of those vital hybrids we were talking about. So it's not
a super being. And you want to create the super being,
right?
Yeah.
And so you're going to go for sort of not necessarily somebody who would be a good father, but somebody who would be a good gene donor, and that's not always the same thing.
Right. And you also talk a bit about moms and sex. Right. So we sort of skipped over this idea
Right.
because, obviously another huge problem I see in my office between couples and individual women who come in is their lack of sex drive. They literally have no libido. And we said that if they are on the birth control pill and then again, if they are on an SSRI, but
that may be the culprit. But also the other culprit is just having little kids who are all on top of you all day long. I mean, if you're all touched out and you're getting enough sort of physical
contact,
intimacy with your kids, and your oxytocin levels are already plenty high, you're not going to be horny. I mean, high oxytocin means low desire, basically.
And does one have? I know the answer, I think, to this question, but does one have high oxytocin when they're nursing?
Very high,
yes,
ultra high.
Because
so the active nursing is like a form of birth control. You know, you're not oxytocin suppresses testosterone levels. Basically, they're kind of on a seesaw. If one is up, the other very well may be down. So in men who are home with their babies and doing attachment parenting and holding babies, they end up with higher oxytocin levels and lower testosterone levels, and they're less likely to stray, and they're also sort of more understanding about there being less sex available at a time when there's babies in the house. I think, women need to sort of give themselves a break and not, my thinking is that when you're kind of in mommy mode and baby mode, your husband needs to sort of take a back seat and understand that your body is sort of being used for other things, especially when you're nursing. It's really hard to be horny when you're nursing. I mean, you're not ovulating, you're not lubricating. And, unfortunately, I think it can be a time for men to cheat if they're not sort of doing the attachment parenting and holding the baby and having those high oxytocin levels. But hopefully it's a time where the young family is totally nesting and they understand that, right now sex is not the priority.
I have to say that when I went to my doctor after one of my children was born, he gave me the 6-week clear. After 6 weeks, they say you can have sex. And a lot of women, say to their husbands, they come back and say, oh, I still can't have sex yet, right? They say, my doctor said no. But I looked at my doctor.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah, we lie, right? We lie because we just don't want to be touched. But
also we can't take responsibility for saying, right now I don't want to be touched. I'm sorry, I don't feel that way.
Because it might cause conflict and there's all these kinds of things. And he looked at me and I said to my doctor, who I'm very good friends with, and he's quite funny, and I said, well, how do women do this? Like, why would they want to have sex 6 weeks postpartum, especially if they're nursing, knowing what I do, knowing I specialized for a long time in perinatal mood disorders? And he said, I have to say, Nell, I always tell my patients, inebriate and lubricate. I thought that was a really interesting way to, recommend some sex when you're not feeling it. You do mention in the book that there are a couple things for women, and we're talking about maybe out of the postpartum zone there, that women can do if they are feeling a really low sex drive, which is progesterone cream, amino acids, some ginkgo. Is there any others that you can recommend to people who might be listening
I don't
to this?
usually I don't start with progesterone cream. One of the things I really recommend people start with is maca, MACA, which I think if you're in your 40s or 50s and you've got low libido and you're not very well lubricated, I think maca can be really helpful. And then if you've got hot flashes or night sweats, I think black cohosh has a lot of data to support that it can really help treat those symptoms. So, I mean, when my patients get with when they start to have perimenopausal complaints, we start with like maca and black cohosh if they have sweats or hot flashes. And then if we're not getting anywhere, I will recommend that they try bioidentical hormones, not bioequivalent, which is a marketing scheme to confuse you, but bioidentical. Bioequivalent is still sort of synthetic and not natural. But the idea is to try to use hormones that more closely mimic our own natural hormones and aren't the synthetic progestins that get women into trouble. And progestin can really make women depressed and sedated, and a lot of times it's very uncomfortable. So the hormone thing, like hormone supplements, I mean, I talk about this a lot in Moody Bitches. It's very complicated. You have to kind of go over it with your doctor and what your risks are and what the benefits are. But that's why I like to start with herbs like maca or black cohosh, because I think you can get pretty far in treating perimenopausal complaints. The other big, huge complaint is insomnia. I mean,
Yes.
insomnia often comes before anything else comes. And there are lots of ways to treat insomnia that don't involve prescriptions that I definitely run through in Moody Bitches.
And, that's the other thing. We're not going back to the insomnia and depression and anxiety and taking it out of just the post-40 perimenopausal age. This is a huge thing, right? We see a lot of women come into our offices and they say that they can't sleep and that they are on some sort of sleep prescription. And you talk a lot about, I'm just going to give a list of some of the holistic things we can do to help our depression and anxiety that you mentioned in Moody Bitches. You talk about, and you just mentioned a few of them, herbal psychopharmacology, plant-based medicine. You write a lot about pot, and we can talk a little bit about that in a second. I'm really interested in psychospirituality and things around the psychospiritual world, like ayahuasca, meditation. You bring up meditation. You also talk about nutrition, and you say something really interesting to me. You say the interface of nutrition and psychiatry is a field in its infancy still. And this is remarkable to me. I mean, when I was being trained, we never took a class on nutrition or any sort of psychospiritual classes. And now I was trained only 10, 12 years ago at this point. So it's not that I'm so far away from my training. Can you talk a little bit about why this is the case? And is there a resistance in our field? Obviously, because big pharma pushes pills for anything that we're feeling when we don't feel well. But can you talk a little bit about why you think that there's a resistance or a lack of information in terms of nutrition and mood and psychospirituality?
Well, it's hard to say why. I mean, definitely when I was in medical school, there was very little about nutrition. We learned about vitamins and enzymes, but that was about it. And we would sort of joke like, oh, you would just get a nutrition consult in the hospital if you needed that. But when I started asking my patients what they ate for breakfast, lunch, dinner, a lot of them said to me, I've never had a doctor ask me what I eat before. And I was like, isn't that kind of crazy? To not want to know like the fuel you're putting into the machine. So it's one of the many blind spots in medicine. And there is a huge interface with what you eat and how you feel. And there's a lot of really interesting information about the connection between inflammation and depression, anxiety, insomnia, and also the connection with like bacteria and probiotics and fermented foods, which is pretty strong and interesting. But look, in terms of spirituality, I'm a psychiatrist, and they never talked about spirituality in medical school and psychiatric residency training. It never really came up, and it only maybe as a sort of addendum to, well, if you send somebody to a 12-step program, there's some spirituality that gets addressed there. But I think I've been starting to write about this now that I think that one of the things that keeps us healthy and happy is really being not just connected to each other,
but connected to our own souls.
But like connected to ourselves, like in our bodies, connected to our souls. And then, sometimes having these sort of magical moments where you feel connected to the universe or connected to nature or connected to another person. Those sort of attachments and connections. It's the opposite of separation anxiety, basically, right? And I really think that a lot of what drives our malaise and people feeling miserable is this sort of separation anxiety, that we are more isolated than we're supposed to be. By nature, we're supposed to be living in clans, with a lot of social contact. So I think that's some of our malaise. So yeah, I am definitely very interested in meditation and ayahuasca. I wouldn't put them in the same category. I probably talk a lot more about meditation and Moody Bitches. I'm planning on talking much more about ayahuasca and sort of peak mystical experiences in my next book, because I do think that it's part of what sort of feeds us and keeps us satisfied, is having these sort of meaningful transcendent experiences where we sort of are outside of our little silos and bubbles.
A wonderful writer that I'm interviewing next week, his name is Francis Weller, and he talks about the fact that we learn about our souls at the shrine of grief. And when we medicate, we can't have that experience, and that we don't become enlightened souls, or we don't understand our truth, or we don't connect to ourselves unless we go through some element of suffering and learn how to have what he calls an apprenticeship with our grief. And so it's interesting because I felt like at the first, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I felt like at the first, 8 to 10 years of my private practice, I was convincing people to go on medications. Don't be ashamed of your mental illness. We have these drugs now that are out there that you can take that will make you feel better, because they were just coming onto the market, and that's how we were being trained. And now I'll spend the next 10 to 20 to 30 years of my life unraveling that to some extent, because again, we didn't realize the side effects. We didn't realize how hard it was for these people, for these women and men to taper off of these drugs. We didn't realize that giving them can cause a propensity for violence. And really, what we were just saying, a disconnection to the soul.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, I think all this, I talk about the last chapter of Moody Bitches, I talk about, it's called staying sane in an insane world. Mm-hmm. And I talk a lot about all this disconnection, that's really driving a lot of the pathology. Mm-hmm. But I agree that if you're medicating away your bad feelings or your grief, you aren't necessarily going to grow and change and learn. And you're also not going to have any kind of, these peak exhilarating experiences which can be, really transformative for people.
Right.
So, conflict is sort of growth trying to happen. And if we medicate away all our conflict and all our unease, we're stunting ourselves, basically.
Mm-hmm. Right. So this brings us back to the idea and the title of Moody Bitches. So I'm incredibly interested about people, about artists, about scientists, entrepreneurs, inventors, feminists who are living at the wild edges, that we're not meant to just live in one range, right? We're not meant to live depressed all the time, but we're certainly not meant to live happy all the time. I don't even really like to use that word anymore, that happiness exists. We're meant intrinsically to be moved, to feel things deeply, to have a large emotional range, because then we do get to feel those what you call peak experiences. I love how you say that, both on both ends of the spectrum, the sad spectrum, which is where we're really living, right? When we're sad, we're not just numb. We're actually really feeling life, even if it is painful. And when we're falling in love, for example, we're having that emotional experience, which is why so much of us stay wanting to live on this planet, right, is to feel those moments of joy and love and falling in love and being moved. So it's amazing that you wrote this book, because you talk about this idea, and really the whole book is built around the idea that we have to encourage women to embrace their wild edges, right, that we want to feel these things. And I think one of the words that you used was bake your own cake. We have to reverse this idea of feeling reluctant to show our full expression on this planet.
Right. Or sometimes you have to kind of do it yourself and give yourself what you need. As opposed to sort of, having a birthday where nobody acknowledged it, nobody brought you a cake, you bake your own cake, sometimes you have to sort of fulfill yourself. But the crucial thing is to feel that need or that longing and to heed it. I think for women, I know I am, and I think a lot of women are, especially in the estrogen years, 20s, 30s, it's all about making sure everybody else has what they need. And certainly when you've got little kids, I mean, there's so many times I'd run out of the house and I had the diaper bag and I had the, their school lunch, blah, blah, but I hadn't, brushed my teeth or put on earrings or, match my socks or something. I was so sort of other oriented. And I think that on meds, you get the same way, where you don't feel your own feelings. You don't figure out what you actually need and stand up for what you need.
Mm-hmm. Or what your soul's purpose is on this earth. I think that a lot of the dysthymia and a lot of the anxiety and depression that I see and how it manifests in my office is that people come in and they don't know their dharma. Right? They say, I know I'm supposed to be experiencing something here, but all I'm experiencing is a lot of depression, anxiety, because I don't actually really know what's going to create a meaningful experience for me on this planet.
Right.
Right. And that happens. We can only figure that out by really being quiet, reconnecting with ourselves. You mentioned nature quite a bit in the book. having some
I'm
quiet,
big on nature.
big
I'm
on
pro
nature.
nature.
You're pro nature. And to have these quiet spaces and these quiet moments where we can really reconnect with those inner longings and those voices inside of us that actually tell us what we want to do in this life. So what a wonderful job you did, Dr.
Yes.
Holland. I am so happy that you published Moody Bitches. I loved the title. I thought it was provocative and informative at the same time, and entertaining. And you are just a wealth of information. How can anybody listening to this find you out there if they want more of Dr. Holland?
Oh, I don't know. You can just Google me. I'm easy to find. I mean, I have a website, drholland.com.
Great.
But I'm pretty easy to find. When I met people at parties, I used to say, if you just Google Julie Ecstasy, you'll find me, because back then I had a book out on
ecstasy, right?
We could talk about drugs some other time.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Dr. Holland. I really appreciate your time today.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us on Unscripted. For more information, please join our private Facebook group, The Daily Unscripted, where you'll find me checking in and flooding you with tons of information on how to live a life unscripted, and where you can ask the community all kinds of questions you may be too uncomfortable to ask anyone else. Think of this as your little free therapy space on the web. And you can follow us also on our website, which is thedaily.com, and that's THEDALY.com, or all my comings and goings on Instagram at Nell Daily. And please, please, please email us any questions you may have at nell@thedaily.com. I would love to hear your thoughts, comments, and guest ideas. I try to read as many emails that come in personally as I can. And it's really helpful to get the feedback from you guys. So please email. Till next time, guys, may the light in me shine to the light in you. Namaste. Peace out.